What's going on? This is Zach Adelstein with DFS Army, and today we're going to be going over the Week 6 main slate for college football on Draftkings. Doing this solo this week. Aaron wasn't able to make it. So we're going to go over these games, go through them. I think it's a really fun slate. I kind of like this a lot better than the past few weeks. Some really big matchups here. I think it's going to be a really fun Saturday. We have Texas OU, we have TCU, Kansas. Um, Tennessee LSU, I think is going to be a really good game. Um, and yeah, just all day, I think there's going to be several top matchups. Tonight, we have Texas A&M and M and Alabama, and even some of the lower known games, Florida State and North Carolina State. I think it's going to be a really fun week, and could set up for a really really big week next week. So yeah, why don't we jump right in? We're going to go over these game by game and just some of the top plays for each game, like we do every week. If you want more of our content, be sure to head over to dfsarmy.com and go subscribe. We have our NFL content, we have our NBA content coming up. MLB is wrapping down, but we have great Premier League going on. NASCAR is still doing great, and of course, our college football content with our Domination Station Optimizer, our cheat sheets every week with all of our top plays, and our Discord where we have breaking news. We discuss top plays. And it's always hopping every Saturday. So yeah, let's jump in. This first game, Missouri is traveling to Florida Saturday morning. Total is 54.5, and Florida is favored by 10 here. I think this is a massive letdown spot for Missouri. The past 2 weeks, they've really emotionally have to be drained. Almost beating Auburn on that overtime fumble and missing all those field goals, and then having a double-digit lead at against Georgia and losing that last week. Just think this is kind of a letdown spot for them. Anthony Richardson, we saw a ceiling game last time out 2 weeks ago against Tennessee. Put up a ton of points, put up 450 yards passing, kind of showed what he can do. I do think this is a nice spot for him, a nice price for him. Quarterback is kind of a place we might have to get some value this week because a lot, especially in cash, because a lot of the good receivers and running backs are priced up this week. Uh, don't really want much Brady Cook. I don't. There's not a ton I want on Missouri except a value play. Good value play we'll get to. Don't like any of these running backs. Over at receiver, I think Shorter is an option. He's been getting decent volume. I would do it if he's a piece if you're putting 50, 60 plus lineups up. But that's about it. Value plays I'm looking at if he is good to go is Dominic Lovett. Sitting here at 3,800. Has a nice base, especially for cash. Pretty good floor, nice ceiling. Hadn't gotten a ton of touchdown volume, but he's getting the yards. He's got good upside play. And we saw that they can. This Mizzou team can move the ball. I think he had over 10 targets last week against Georgia, and he's going to have a ton of targets again here. Moving on to Tennessee, going down to LSU. I think this is going to be a really good game. It's got a 63.5 total. LSU is getting 2.5 points. Tennessee's favorite here. And Kenan Hooker is always in play. Always good for 25 to 30 plus points. Anytime he's playing a good team, we're going to play the whole game. And then, has that nice huge ceiling as well, 30, 45 points. If this game stays close, I do think he can get up there. I think Jaden Daniels is going to get overlooked and is a really nice GPP play here. He hasn't done a ton the past few weeks. Hadn't needed to against New Mexico, and this passing game has just been off. Read this week they had a players only meeting with that passing game basically. Daniels with his receivers. They're really working on things, trying to work after practice, get everything going. But we just saw Tennessee give up 450 yards to Anthony Richardson. They don't have a great secondary. This is a game that could shoot out. I don't totally love the spread here. I do think Tennessee is a little bit better than LSU, but I do think LSU is going to stay in this game and can put up some points. This is GPP play, though, because I don't totally trust Daniels with the way this passing game has gone, but I do think he could be low owned and could get up there. Don't like any of these running back rooms personally. Small did look like he took a step forward as that starting running back. He had, I believe, 19 carries against Florida. Didn't have the great, had a nice outing against Florida. And Wright only had, I believe it was 10 carries. So I definitely think that they're showing that Small is that number one guy there. LSU has a pretty good run defense, though, and there's just other places at that price I like to go here. But going over to wide receiver with Tillman out here, Hyatt and Brew McCoy are great plays again. Um, McCoy really showed out last game. I thought he was coming. He was due for that breakout game, and he did have a really nice game with over 100 yards and a touchdown against Florida. LSU, the two places that should be great to go to. Marbute, first of all, is a mystery to me. He was a preseason All-American, top receiver last year before he got hurt. It just seems like he doesn't want to be there. He's one of those guys that I kind of want to check every week to make sure he's on the team before I roster him, just because he really seems like he's ready to transfer. But he has all the talent in the world. It's just putting it together and seeing if he wants to be there. And then Neighbors is target share leader behind, actually, Butte is. Neighbors is up there as well, has been the target share leader lately. And if this passing game breaks out, I do think those are going to be the two guys that really benefit from it. And those are GPP plays only. I wouldn't do it in a single lineup, but I do think that there is a chance that this passing game could break out if it is going to this year. Arkansas at Mississippi State, there's a lot of news to watch for here. As of right now, total 62.5 with Mississippi State favored by 8. See numbers anywhere from 7 to 9 on this game. Starting with Will Rogers. Rogers is always in play. He's going to put up that huge volume. He does every week. Last week he put up another 45 passes. Even put up 50 passes against Bowling Green. If they're going to do that, they're going to put it up every week. Arkansas does have a nice defense, but I do think that this is always a place to play Rogers. I want to watch KJ Jefferson. If he comes back here, he's in concussion protocol. There's a chance he could take the field this week. We need to really watch and see what he does. He didn't practice yesterday, I don't think. He is trending towards out, as he hadn't practiced as of yesterday, the last I saw. So watch that. But if somehow he is good to go, he didn't do, he got hurt against Bama. It's a tough game. But you look at his numbers before that, he has a nice floor. He's cheap here, cheap enough that I love him in most formats. And I do think he's, a good play if he goes. Going over to running back, Raheem Sanders, especially if Jefferson is out, I think is a top play here. He's a nice value. Had a good game against Alabama. Struggled against Texas A&M, but came back, had a really nice game against Bama. If Jefferson's out, I think he's going to get a ton of volume, going to get 22, 25, maybe even 30 carries here. They're really going to try to lean on him, get him involved in the passing game, do everything they can. He's going to be their best player on the field. So that is someone I want to lean on here, regardless, but especially if Jefferson is out. As far as the Mississippi State running backs, I do think both of them are in play for GPPs. Don't want to play them together, but just in this offense, they funnel those passes down. Each of them are getting, I think Johnson got 14 carries last week. Marks did only get 7 to that, but Marks is coming back from injury, so kind of want to keep an eye on that. But, those receptions, they add up. They add up quick. So I do think both of them are GPP pieces if you are going to MME and massive multi-entry. Going over to wide receiver, both of these plays, both of these teams kind of spread it out a ton. Hazelwood is a target leader for Arkansas, but he doesn't get enough volume to really do enough with it and just doesn't do enough with that volume. On Mississippi State, the only guy I really target right now is Caleb Ducking, and he's getting closer to the price where he's harder to play. That being said, he has 6 touchdowns on the season. He gets those red zone targets. Even when he's not getting yards, he's getting a touchdown, so he's got a decent floor for you. Did struggle against LSU, as this whole team did. But outside of that, has 6 touchdowns in 4 games outside of that LSU game. Matt Landers is really cheap. He's kind of a pump play to maybe have 5% of if you're going to make 100 lineups. He's getting a ton of volume, had 10 targets last week. I don't really like this offense a ton, this passing game a ton if Jefferson is out. So that would be a fade for me. But Landers, if you want to go there, if Jefferson is in for a punt play, I don't mind that at all. Moving over to probably the game of the day. Game day is going to be there. 7 on an early kickoff, but a really nice spot. Total right now is when I wrote this down, it was 67.5. I know it's up to 69.5 a lot of places now. And Kansas is favored by 7. It's down to 6.5 some places. Right there around the touchdown with a nice high total. These are the teams we really like to target. These are the games we really like to target. I think both these quarterbacks are in play. Max Duggan had a huge game last week. Put up 53 fantasy points. Had not done that in a long time, and he still, he did it with his legs, but with some bigger runs.
So that's something I really, it's harder to predict those runs. I mean, that right there, you wipe off those two touchdowns and that, 116 yards, and you take it back down to his normal, even five rushes for, say, 20 yards. And, that takes off 26 of those points, and that takes him back down into the 20s. That being said, I still think he has big upside. I do think he could break some big runs, but this is a good run defense for Kansas. Um, Jalen Daniels had a really tough week last week. He did run for a touchdown, which does help. He does have 5 rushing touchdowns on the year now, which I really like. It'll be interesting to see if TCU can do to Kansas and to Daniels what Iowa State did. I don't know if they have that kind of defense to do that. I do think they have a very good defense, but I don't know if they have that kind of defense to totally box him in and just not let him move at all, which is what Iowa State did last week. But I do think Daniels is a decent GPP play here with huge upside like he has always had. Going over to running back, there's a few interesting plays here. I think Kendra Miller is always in play with his big upside. This is a Kansas team that has given up some explosive plays, and Miller has had huge plays back-to-back weeks. The touchdown in every game this year, getting used in the passing game a little bit as well. And I just think he's way too cheap for where he has been this year, and especially for his floor. With Highsaw out, Neal will be interesting to me if they want to lean on him more. Last year, they really leaned on him a lot more. They gave him more volume, and he did a lot with it. This year, he does not have a touchdown in the last 3 games. He hasn't been used a ton in the pass game recently either. But he was one of the top running backs coming out of his class when and he's from the Lawrence area, so that's why he stayed home and went to Kansas, and he's been there this whole rebuild. So if they do lean on him, I think he could have a decent game here. So he's somebody I kind of want to watch. Maybe have some GPP shares of him for sure. Going over to wide receiver, this TCU room is really hard. Um, you know, Quinn John, the talent in the world, and just hasn't been able to do much with it this year. Um, Davis had some volume. Last week had a really good game or a decent game. He's getting some volume in the passing game. Tay Barber's getting some volume. Had that big catch last week, um, and then you can even come down to some other. There's just a lot of places to go there if you want a few pieces of it. It's also really hard to get on any of these Kansas pieces just because they spread it out so much. So I probably will be fading most of these wide receivers, but if you want a few pieces, they are there to take to mix and match in 150 lineups. Going over to the Red River Shootout, Texas and OU. This is a neutral site game. Texas is now favored. Last I looked, it was 9 points as soon as viewers got ruled in and that he is playing. The total is around 66. Uh, I had made my notes when I made this that either quarterback is in play here. Viewers at his price, I think, is a really nice play here. Um, that first game he didn't have to do much. They didn't want him to do much. I think they wanted him to get comfortable, kind of see what he did. He looked pretty good in that first half, that first quarter before he got hurt. Of that Alabama game, he can really push it downfield. We know what he brings to the table. He's a GPP play, but he's a nice value play that could really go off as we have seen quarterbacks do the past couple weeks against Oklahoma. Dylan Gabriel is questionable here. I've been kind of looking into it. There have been, some spy pictures and some things, people trying to figure out if he is practicing or not. Texas coaches say they are preparing for him to start. Whether he starts or not, I really don't want a piece of that. Texas has a decent defense, and Gabriel just hasn't lived up to his prices that he's been this year. If he's more around that Hudson Card price, that mid 7s, I think he's decent, but he just hasn't been worth 9K up there. Going over to running back, Bijan's always in play. He's 9K, but this is a team. I mean, look what they just, Oklahoma just gave up to Kendra Miller last week, gave up a ton of yards, really struggled to bring him down. They gave up a ton to both Adrian Martinez rushing as well as Deuce Vaughn. So really gave up some volume there and some yards and a ton of fantasy points to both of those on the ground. So Bijan's really expensive. It's really hard to get to him, but he's in play if you can get there. If you really want to get there, he is in play. Eric Gray's interesting to me. I think if Gabriel's out, they're going to feed him and let him run a ton and just try to slow this game down because I do think Texas the conventional wisdom after the last couple of weeks is whoever's playing OU is going to score, then they need to slow the game down, especially keep their defense off the field. And even if Gabriel's in, I do think he can get some volume here. He's a little bit expensive, so he's GPP only for me with some of the better options cheaper, but I do think he could be a decent play here. Going over to wide receiver, Mims is too expensive for me. I think he has that 15 to 20 point output possibility, but he's just too expensive. He doesn't get those 30, 40 point games that he needs to justify that price. Xavier Worthy is really interesting to me. Had kind of a breakout game last week. Had 2 touchdowns, had a passing touchdown, had his first 100-yard game of the year. We know that what he can bring. Last year in this game, took a screen pass for 80, the first play, or 75, the first play of the game. He has a ton of upside, and I really like his upside with Ewers. I think Ewers has that bigger arm that can get it down the field where Worthy needs it to really put up those points. Jordan Whittington, he's too expensive with his production. He is a decent play and he can get upside, but he's just too much here. Guy I like as a value play here is Jatavian Sanders. He got 6 targets that first week with Ewers, 6 catches, really looked to be on the same page. They've been getting him more and more involved. When he came out of high school, he was the number 1 athlete recruit, and they moved him. He was in high school more of a receiver, and they've moved him to tight end. But he's getting 5 or so targets a game. He's got good hands, good upside, good speed. And in this game, if there's a ton of points, I think that he could be a great value piece that could get you there. Moving over to Michigan and Indiana. Michigan's favored here by 21.5 at Indiana with a 59-point total. Indiana is not a good football team. Watching them, they've really struggled lately, and they seem like they're getting worse. JJ McCarthy might be a GPP piece. I wouldn't get more than like 10% of him in like 150 lineups, but I do think he is someone that eventually is going to have a few games. We've seen his talent in the past, just as a backup role behind McNamara, and he's someone that I think could put up some points eventually in the season. This is a great spot for him to do it. Running back Corum, he's expensive, but back-to-back big weeks. Indiana's not a good run defense. It's hard to pay up on the slate again. He's going to get this volume, 29 and 30 carries. I think this is a great spot. That being said, I don't think they're going to necessarily feed him that much every week. I think they're going to try to get Donovan Edwards more involved as this goes on. They got him 4 catches last week along with his 5 carries. I think they want to give 4 or 5 of those carries from Corum to Edwards as this goes on and get Edwards more involved in the passing game as well. He's kind of that jackknife, that Swiss Army knife that can go all over the place. And he is someone that I think eventually will break out as well. He's GPP only for now, but at this price, it's a nice place to go. The only place I really like on either of these teams for wide receiver would be Cam Camper if he is back. He was out last week with non-COVID illness is what it was listed as. As of today, he's a game-time decision. So we need to kind of keep an eye out, see what's going to go on there if he's back. But he should get a ton of volume. And we did see that Maryland was able to move the ball against this Michigan team. So I do think that there is some upside for Camper at that price. And he's a nice mid-price guy that could get the volume that we need to really get going, especially in cash. Going over to Purdue, Maryland. Maryland's favored here by 3 with a 59-point total. Maryland's at home. Purdue struggled several games lately, especially against the quarterback, and I kind of like Talia here. He hasn't done a ton, and he's one of those guys that he really struggles once they get into conference play. 21 points isn't really what we're looking for from him. But I do think you get you a decent, 25, 30-point outing and is a pivot off of some of the other guys right around that price. Aiden O'Connell's really cheap here. They lowered his salary. Again, had a really tough week last week. I don't think Maryland is nearly as good as this Minnesota defense. So I do think he has some upside there. And at this cheaper price, get you some of that salary savings for GPPs. I do like that a little bit. If he could get you that 30, 35 point outing like he was doing regularly last year. He hasn't done that yet this year, so it is something we need to see, and he needs to get more of those ceiling games. Few interesting plays here at running back. Last week, we had, Roman Hemby is generally the leader on this Maryland rush team, Maryland running backs. But Antoine Littleton was the leader last week here, had 19 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown, also getting involved in the passing game. What I really like is he has a touchdown in every game this year. There's not a ton of value on this slate at 3,600. If you're going to tell me that I'm going to get a guy that's going to get, has a high likelihood of getting into the end zone and could get me 30 to 40 yards, at 3,600, if you're going to give me 10 points locked in with a 25-point upside, I love it. And I do think this is getting more and more of a split, as opposed to him be getting more of the carries, especially with how Littleton did this past week. So I do think that there's some merit to playing Littleton for value. And then Maccabee last week had a decent game as well. He's had a big play in several of the games this year, has a touchdown in 3 of the 4 games he's played in. Got 11 carries, but averaged over 10 yards a carry last week. And this is, another cheap punt play that I do think could be interesting. For me, Maccabee is more of a pivot play off of someone like Littleton that you are looking to get value from. But I do think that both of those guys are in play. Over at receiver, Chad Sizzle is still way too cheap. Charlie Jones last week got kind of banged up, didn't do too well. This whole passing game really struggled, but he still had 10 targets. He's going to get 10 to 15 targets here. He's going to continue to get a ton of volume. And if you told me that between him at 7,000 or like a Mims at 7,900, I'll take his. He did have. Before that, look at that floor. Great cash play, great GPP play, especially against this Maryland team. Over for Maryland, I kind of want to see what's going on. I do think Raheem Jarrett is a great price here, especially for cash. He was banged up in that Michigan game. Excuse me. Came back, had a nice game last week. He's a nice mid-priced guy. He has some upside, and I do think eventually he's going to get more and more involved as well. But again, this passing game hasn't had to do too much because the running game has been pretty good. And that's kind of where I'm at here. If you really want to, Durham is a pump play that you can go with, but he's very much boomer bust. And then a few of these other Maryland receivers are there as well. Going over to Auburn, Georgia. Georgia is the team that is the best team in the country that you really have to be careful with who you play in DFS. Georgia's favored here by 29.5 points with a 50.5 point total. Stetson Bennett, Auburn really has struggled against the pass at times this year, but they haven't been too bad either. Bennett has upside, but he's really kind of been fading the past couple of weeks. I don't like playing either of these Georgia running backs because they just eat into each other too much, especially when they're up here at these prices. So those are fades for me. The only thing I'll really have in GPPs is some pieces of Bowers. He has that. He's basically the epitome of boomer bust. He has that 40-point upside with that 5-point downside. And that's what you're basically going to get from him every week. So you have to know that you don't want to go too heavy on him, but he can win GPPs. Moving over to another game that I think is going to be really, really fun game and really important game for the year is Utah at UCLA. Utah's favored by 4.5, and total is 64.5 here, so nice total. Cam Rising's been really good for Utah this year. If you haven't really watched a lot of them, their passing offense has been their main offense this year, a lot more than their run offense. Rising, if we dig in a little bit and look at this player card, you can see has a nice floor, nice base. You're paying for it. He's priced up here compared to where he usually is, but he has had rushing touchdown in the past game. He's getting a few rushes a game, but he's getting 2 to 4 passing touchdowns every game. This is a game that I do think could become a little bit of a shootout, and Utah could have to air it out a little bit more. And we've seen some success through the air against this UCLA team. DTR is always in play. I think he has looked better this year than he ever has before. When he had to last week, they finally had to let him air it out a little bit, really get involved. He had his 33 passes, 10 rushes, had a rushing touchdown, had 3 passing touchdowns. And I think that's where they like him to be. They want him to be involved in almost every play here. I think he has great upside and a nice floor. Going over to running back, Davian Thompson's just they're not using him as much this year, so especially lately. So I would fade that at that price. Zach Charbonnet is very interesting to me. You can see last week he got a ton of volume. I think he's going to get a ton of volume here. And Utah is not as good of a run defense this year as they have been in the past. That being said, the past couple of weeks they have gone to more sets with 5 down linemen to really slow down the run, which has really helped them. Which is really a detriment to Zach Charbonnet. So for me, he's more of a GPP play with high upside, um, because I do think they're going to really try to stop him and make DTR beat them. But I do think the upside is there because if they start airing it out and really connecting on the pass game, then Charbonnet could really have a big day because they're really going to have to drop back some more defenders. Moving on to wide receiver. With that in mind, I really like stacking DTR with Jake Bobo in some lineups and having some lineups with Charbonnet, because I think one or the other of those could work in this game. And that's not saying that I think that UCLA is going to run all over Utah. I do think this is going to be a very close game, but I think that that is kind of the way they're going to attack, and one of those are going to work better than the other, either the passing game or the run game. And Bobo is really seeming to get on the same page as DTR. Last week or a few weeks ago, Utah lost their tight end, who's their top receiver, in Queethy. So they have moved over. Devon Vele has been one of the top targets since then, as well as Dalton Kincaid, who I really want to kind of look at. He has, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games since Queethy has gone out, and has been getting, I think he has about 16 targets, if I remember right, over those 2 games. He's getting decent volume, or sorry, 12 targets. He's getting decent volume. This is a game that should put up more points. Last 2 weeks, they haven't had to air it out a lot. And I really like this spot at this price. Like I said, there's not a ton of value on this slate, and this is a really nice value piece for all formats. So Kincaid's a guy and a team that loves passing to their tight end. Moving on over to Texas Tech at Oklahoma State. A really high total game, 67.5, especially for a Tech team that's putting up points but doesn't have a ton of defense. Oklahoma State's favored here by 9.5, and I think both of these quarterbacks are in play. Spencer Sanders has been very good this year. Nice cash play, has a nice base, nice floor. Haven't seen a ceiling game for him in several weeks, but he didn't do a ton against Arizona State. Didn't have to do a ton against didn't throw it, didn't do anything against Arkansas Pine Bluff. And against Baylor, they ran the ball a lot more. They were kind of in control from the beginning, and I think tried to control the clock a lot more. But in a close game, you can see he's going to throw the ball a lot. And this is a game that I think will put up points, so they will have to put points on the board. Donovan Smith has been very good. The big thing with him is controlling his turnovers. He has 7 interceptions in the past 4 games. Has 3 fumbles. Has 3 fumbles in those games, so 10 total turnovers in the last 4 games. But he's still putting up fantasy points. Every game outside of that NC State game against a great defense, he put up over 30 fantasy points here. This is a very good defense, so it's something we kind of need to watch. They did kind of fade at that end of that Central Michigan game, but they have been very good since then. But in this Kitty offense that was run last year by Western Kentucky, the year before that by Houston Baptist, they throw the ball a lot, they air the ball out a lot, and he's going to throw the ball a ton. I mean, look at these numbers: 58, 56, 48. He's going to throw the ball a ton here, and he's going to get yards. So it's just controlling those turnovers, and if he can get touchdowns, get the ball in the end zone. He also has a rushing touchdown in each of the last 4 weeks, which is really helping that as well. So he is somebody that I like, honestly, in all formats. If you look at this Vegas and you believe this Vegas line, if they're going to put up close to 30 points, he's somebody that's definitely in play at this price. Going over to running back, Oklahoma State's been doing some weird things with Richardson this year. I think they're trying to save him, for the meat of their schedule. If you look at the 2 competitive games this year, he was hurt 1 week. If you look at the 2 competitive games, though, this year, he has 20 plus carries, 27, 24, getting great volume. Not necessarily the best efficiency, but he's getting a ton of volume at a decent price here. And I do think this is a good place. Tech has struggled against the run. They're giving up almost 5 yards carry. Going over to wide receiver, we need to watch if Miles Price is in play or not here. If he is, it kind of hurts, kind of spreads out more that passing game. And this is kind of a roulette wheel, anyways, with this Texas Tech passing game, with who is going to get targets every week. Bradley's kind of tailed off. One guy I really like here that had a great week last week is Xavier White. He had 10 targets last week, caught 9 of them for 120 yards and a touchdown. In his career before that, he had 8 total receptions, 6 of them this year. So that was obviously a career day for him. But he's somebody I kind of like for GPPs to get some pieces on as a last piece or in a game stack. This is a game I think you can stack. As far as Oklahoma State goes, my favorite receiver there all year and continues to be Braden Johnson. Had a down week last week, but he is that Z receiver that Oklahoma State loves to target in this offense. I think he has, several touchdown upside. He has big play upside, and he's the target leader on this team. Brendan Presley had a nice week last week that took away from Johnson. He had 8 receptions for 86 yards. Still didn't get in the end zone. And, still don't think he has the upside that Johnson has. And it's just $500 cheaper. Moving over here, Wisconsin and Northwestern. This is an ugly game. I'm not touching either of those quarterbacks. Going over to running back. Evan Hull's decent play has been kind of boom or bust here. Hasn't done great the past couple of weeks, even with 21 rushes against Miami, Ohio. And this Wisconsin team does have a very good defense. Still has a very good defense. So not somebody I love, but he is a GPP play for me. Allen is a GPP pivot for me. I think not many people are going to go there after a 2-yard performance last week against Illinois. But I do think they try to go back to Wisconsin football. They're just going to ground and pound. New coach this week. They're trying to prove something. I think they're going to have better defense here, and they're really just going to try to get on the ground and pound, get everything they can. So I do think he has some decent upside. That being said, at 8,500, he needs to put up 30, 35 points for you to win a GPP, to be in the nuts. And that's going to be hard to do at this price and in this matchup with such a low total. Total, if I didn't 44 with Wisconsin favor, and what do I prefer? The volume from getting 8-10 targets a game, some decent games, not bad. One of those, but Ole Miss and Vandy. 39 and favored. Just have the top on offense, but that's because I really like running. Role carries to, I believe, against 15 carries to 9 against Kentucky. Touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. He and Vanderbilt team is not great to run. Really up a lot easier than a lot of fantasy. So judge value, we're a decent play. Zach Evans would be a pivot because people there. This is more a 50 split. I do think Evans is in play, numbers here, but if 9 or 10, then he could put 15 fantasy pivot right there. There's a week here. Has actually had 3 games, and he has an upside game. Every week, I think 2 weeks ago, he had 7 last. Not getting better. Have an upside. Play some He every week with with 14 targets, 7 targets. Had a ton of 2 weeks ago and didn't have very many. This get a lot of targets, but time we just PP play under, but there is an upside there, I think. Over Washington State, Washington, right? I think everyone saw it. This could be decent go, but I do like the pricing here. This is decent. I think other places, their prices, I do think up. It's been airing 32. Regularly mid 30s. Running back is a deep player. We saw UCLA be to a little bit, and Arizona should giving much change this week, so it is volume with this new coaching regime that has gone in since Herb Edwards has been taken. Then it's something to get to. This one go because you don't know who right going in. So I'm gonna team are the wide receivers, and then maybe play Lindsay and 72. He had a big week last week. Back-to-back 30 DraftKings point games, 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. 177 yards in the last 2, or 277 yards on 16 catches. So he's had some really great weeks. So I do like this. I think he's a fine play here, but I also love McMillan. McMillan had the upside. The last 2 weeks, Odunzi's had 19 targets. McMillan has also had 19 targets, and you go back the week before when Odunzi was out, he had 10 targets that week. So 29 in the last 3 weeks at 6,200 is great for me, great volume. Doesn't quite have the ceiling so far that Odunzi has had. Doesn't have those big plays generally. He has, had some in these earlier games, but hasn't recently. He's more of that middle receiver. But if you're going to get that volume in this PPR format at 6,200, I think he's a great play on this slate that doesn't have a lot of those mid-price guys that have a ton of volume. A lot of them more boomer bust with big plays. So he's a great play, I think, here. The only other place that you can really go is Jalen Polk. He hasn't done much the past couple weeks. Had that big game against Michigan State. I wouldn't chase it personally, but if you want a few pieces of it in game stacks or something like that, maybe 5% in 150 lineups. Moving over to another big game. Well, one side of it's a big game. The last game on the slate is Ohio State at Michigan State. Total here is 63, and Michigan State is favored by 25.5. Stroud hasn't had to do a ton lately, so they haven't really let him loose, which is interesting. Last week blew out Rutgers, threw it 22 times. Wisconsin blew them out 27. That Notre Dame game, he put it up 34 times, but when they haven't been challenged, he hasn't thrown it more than 27 times, which is a bit concerning, except for they can put up points so fast. I don't hate this 9,000, 9,200 price tag on him for his, upside and floor. My biggest concern is you have something like last week where they just take off immediately and they don't use him. So there is a bit of a risk here playing Stroud. But you have that huge upside every week. And this is a Michigan State team that that gives up. It's a pass funnel team, and they give up, for the past 2 years, they've given up a ton of air yardage. Going over to running back, TreVeyon Henderson should be back. So that kind of cuts into Mayan Williams' upside. If Henderson is out, I do think Williams is a nice play here. Michigan State has not been a good run defense this year like they were last year. So it's something I kind of want to keep an eye on. That being said, that their prices, if both of them are in, I don't love either of them just because they cut into each other so much. I do want to see if Henderson, just for the future, Henderson's going to start taking more of a workload here. They've really held him back this year and haven't let him do a ton. I don't know if it's injuries or they're trying to save him and not just overdo him. He's going to get his 1,000 yards. He's going to have a good numbers at the end of the year. But from a week-to-week basis, he hadn't broken off any huge runs this year. He just hasn't been who he was last year. So just something to keep an eye on for the rest of the year. Going over to wide receiver, today read that JSN is out this week. Want to verify that, keep an eye on that. But if he is out, it kind of clarifies things a lot more for me. Again, Marvin Harrison Jr. has a ton of upside. Kind of faded off the past couple of weeks in volume. But my favorite play here, maybe my favorite receiver on this slate, is Emeka Egbuka. Continues to just be a beast. Last week didn't have to do much. He didn't throw it much, so kind of throw that out. But outside of that, has at least 24 points every game. It really was growing and settling into those, mid 30s. Ton of touchdown volume. They're getting him involved in the run game a little bit. They're just trying to get him the ball everywhere they can. Look at that, 3 state games over, 116 to 118 yards. Just great player, great receiver. He was a top wide receiver recruit, and I think he's a sophomore now. Going over just to show you where Marvin Harrison's been the past couple of weeks, I do still think he has that huge upside in this offense. So it is something to watch. Last kind of place I want to look in this Ohio State passing game that I think is a good GPP play has actually been decent is Julian Fleming. Has a touchdown in each of the games since they started really playing him. Didn't have a target in those first 2 weeks. And then they started getting him involved in Toledo, and they've really gotten him more and more involved the past 2 weeks. He was their number 4 last year behind JSN, Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave. He was the guy that would come in when one of them would have an issue. So he's back to the number 4 role again this year, but seems like they're trying to get him more and more involved in getting him going this year, which I love. And that touchdown production makes him a nice mid-price value play on this slate for GPPs. The 2 places, if you really want to go to a Michigan State player, for me would be Keon Coleman and Jaden Reed. Coleman still had 6 receptions last week, decent PPR, but with Reed back, he really hasn't been able to do a ton. Reed had 13 targets last week. I love that target share. My biggest problem is the person that's throwing it to him. I really can't do much with it, especially against this Ohio State team, and especially, without Kenneth Walker there to get that team to stack the box. So there's really no holes for them to throw the ball like there were last year. So I think Reed's a decent value play here for GPPs. If he's going to get 15 targets, and you have to account for that and take that into consideration. But just a GPP piece, not much there with that. But yeah, that's the last game on this slate. Again, going over this, I do think there are some really good places to go. You're going to have to make some decisions for cash, get some value pieces in there, some cheap pieces to fit all of this in, because there's not a lot of value pieces under like 6K on these, especially at running back, and then going over to wide receiver. There's not a ton of top value pieces there under 6K either, especially 5,500. But there are some really good pieces in there that I think you can get in. I think this is a great GPP slate. So many high scoring games, so many games with totals over 60, several games with totals over 65. And I just think this is going to be a really fun weekend. Once again, get our latest notes, get our latest news, to get all of our cheat sheets, all of our information on all of the slates. We do all of the Draftkings slates, most of the Fanduel slates, any of them with contests worth entering. We put out cheat sheets for that. We have our domination station optimizer for every slate out there, whether it's a showdown slate or all of the full slates. And be sure to come on over to DFS Army today, sign up. In the description down below will be a discount code to get 10% off of your complete subscription for the lifetime of your subscription. So yeah, would love to see you over there. If you come over, hit me up in Slack. Be sure to say hi. And I hope everyone has a great week this week. So yeah, good luck this week, and we will see you next week.